Let's get to our next topic. Governor Hickenlooper delivered his State of the State address on Thursday, focusing on healthcare, marijuana regulation, education funding, and transportation. In response to moves to repeal the Affordable Care Act and associated state programs, he commented that Colorado's health exchange is here to stay, noting the last thing we would want Congress making all our decisions around healthcare. As I butchered it, Ed, it seemed that it was a sign of why it was not a wise statement to make. If you're talking about that we don't want Congress going through, like you said, having reform on healthcare reform, it's exactly kind of where Congress was before. Reaction to the State of the State, which again is another symbolic speech, but what you hear in the halls.
Well, it's interesting. The point you bring up about his remarks on healthcare were really the only truly divisive things that he said in the speech. In concept, everybody seemed to agree with where Hickenlooper is going. He tapped the feeling of the legislature and said he wanted action on what are considered the two main issues of this session. He wants to pass construction defects reform legislation, and he wants them to come up with a bill or a ballot initiative that would increase transportation funding. Now, the trick is the details, and Hickenlooper didn't offer a lot of details. In fact, I can only count 3 new initiatives he came up with, all of which are reasonably minor. But when it came to transportation funding, what he said essentially was, look, we need to give something to the voters, and by the way, we don't have any money to cut in state government. Republicans have actually been unusually willing to say, we'll consider putting a tax hike on the ballot if you let us cut money from the from the state government and from some other areas to show that the state is willing to pitch into this. And Hickenlooper's speech kind of rubbed them the wrong way, almost like saying, hey, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I want the Democrats' idea, not your idea. It'll be interesting to see whether that throws a loop at all into what have been some very constructive, ongoing talks since June, I'm told, at the state capitol about trying to find a transportation plan. But in general, it was classic Hickenlooper. It was big ideas. Please give me something. You know, even when he spoke about rural broadband, I want 100% of the state covered by 2020. Everybody said, I like that idea, but he didn't mention how we were going to do that. So it's kind of, here you go, legislature. One of his last words was giddy up. That clearly was what he intends the legislature to do for the next 120 days.
Justine, do you think there are any issues out there that a split legislature can take Governor Hickenlooper's at least suggestion and giddy up towards some action?
Probably promoting goats. I think we all can get behind promoting goats. I think for most, I have to agree, most of his speech was not really anything new that we haven't heard in previous State of the States, but I think he is kind of following a line that's not, you know, splitting the parties within Colorado. There's like some major issues that, you know, are going to come up, but it seems like it's business as usual this time around for the governor. So
when it comes to a State of the State address, it's going to be ceremonial.
Yeah.
Patty, we only, technically would have one more State of the State address to look forward to from Governor Hickenlooper. I like the fact that Ed brought up the idea of classic Hickenlooper. You think the classic Hickenlooper speech, did this hit that bar?
No, because he did have the giddy up, but it was a little more sober-sided than last year. You know, when he was very ebullient, just about to be a newlywed, and the state was looking up. Certainly, it looked like he was going to have a better year, the Democrats nationally. I think in this case, we will get something on transportation on the ballot. I don't think it's going to be segways, although could work going to the mountains if you can figure out how to carry your skis. I think his plan to go after black market marijuana and really lock down Colorado's system, which has gained general raves across the country as others are rolling it out, but the black market issue is still a concern. So I think people will get beyond that. It's law and order, and it's a good one. We'll see something with transportation, but we are going to have a very divided legislature this session.
David, we've beaten the whole ceremonial speech idea into the ground, but do you see any nuggets of possible progress there?
I think the governor's overlooked a source of progress. He accurately talked about how Utah spends 4 times as much money on roads as Colorado does. And of course, that's very important. He talked about we should look about putting 3 lanes on I-25 all the way from Wyoming down to New Mexico. But so why is it then when we have this largest budget in the history of Colorado, half of which is actually exempt from any citizen control under the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, that we're still out of money? the Independence Institute Citizens Budget from a few years ago identified $1 billion of spending cuts, and we could start with the money in the movie welfare program, which gave millions of dollars to Quentin Tarantino, who already has $100 million for this disgusting movie, The Hateful Eight, which is filmed in Colorado with the taxpayers' money, but set in Wyoming. So even if you're attracted by hate tourism, it's going to go to Wyoming instead anyway. Utah has one of the best public school systems in the country and spends less, far less per pupil than Colorado. So the governor ought to look at Utah to see what they're doing better to save them money so that they can spend the money on transportation.
We offered positive tips about Utah and maybe a great tip for Wyoming if they're interested in hate tourism. You heard that here first, least hateful hate tourism.